Hello everyone, I'm Jeffrey Grutner. We are all experiencing a time of enormous change. And there's conflict in the world, there's confusion, there's deception, there's uncertainty. There's also all of these potentials and these possibilities with new ideas and new approaches. And yet we are standing in the breach between these various things. Well, astrology is a powerful tool to help to explain what is going on in the outer world and within us. But the language of astrology could be confusing to many. So what I want to do is to use as plain a language as possible to explain what's going on astrologically so that anyone, we hope, can relate to it. And I'm also going to use this tool here, if you will. I have set up a kind of planetarium, which we just showed in the beginning with the symbol of the moon, and here I'm standing next to the symbol for the sun. And in time, I will fill in the rest of the planets. But I want to use this as a way to help us understand how the planets and the relationships are, how they express what they do. And that ultimately, by putting it together like this, it's on this little patch of Earth that we're mapping what's going on in the sky into this space. And for the time being, I'm calling this a planetarium. It is like the way the ancients would have done it, is to have a space where they could observe what is going on in the sky and place them on the ground in these particular alignments. So we have a circle, and so far we have just the sun and the moon. So I wanted to speak in plain language, and I want to use this little planetarium, if you will, to try to explain what is going on. And again, because I want to do this in plain language, there will be some oversimplifications, even though I think that any astrologer would also appreciate it, but there will be some oversimplifications, and I will draw contrasts because some of this is very complicated and there's a broad range of things to understand. So with that, what I want to do is after this introductory video, I'm going to make 4 different videos so that it's broken down into smaller increments. And the 4 things that I want to explore is, number 1, the big picture, the kind of what's going on in terms of long-term cycles across generations and why there is so much intensity right now. Then I want to go back to look at the fall equinox, because there was a particularly powerful energy at that time, and we engaged in a ceremony at Serpent Mound with a group at that time. And so I'm going to explain those dynamics in a little more detail and why that is still significant even now. And thirdly, I'm going to look at the full moon just passed. Even though it is past, it articulates many important and powerful things about the energy that is ongoing, that is continuing to unfold. Then finally, I'm going to examine that very unfolding of energy, because there are several more really significant points, especially in these next 2 weeks, even the next week. And within that, the part of the idea here is, by doing these explanations ahead of time, then we have the understanding so that when we look at those particular points that are coming up and we choose to do ceremony at those times, The understanding will already be there, and we can focus on the ceremony. So I want to start out with a few points about astrology and some of the ways that it works. So first of all, when we talk about astrology and we're talking about a planet, or in this case the two luminaries, and we talk about them as having astrological archetypes. Well, what we've studied and noticed is that there are certain groupings of the human experience that we call the astrological archetypes that are linked to what we're observing in the sky. It's not that the planet is causing anything, it's just that they are in sync. What is happening in the human experience and what is going on in the sky, and that gives us this powerful tool to allow us to try to understand and predict what might be unfolding. And so that idea is analogous to the idea of entanglement in quantum mechanics. The idea that, what Einstein called spooky action at a distance, that one object across the universe can affect the other. So here's a way in which we are in sync, and it's similar or like that. But we know this from thousands of years of study. So that's the first thing. Each planet has with it a bundle of experience or activity in our human experience, and by observing them, we can kind of understand what's going on. When we say that the planet is doing this, we're really talking about the archetype and what's going on inside us human beings and in the collective of humanity. That's what we're talking about. So that the planets are doing what they do, but down here there's all this interaction, this unfoldment here on the earth plane that's linked to it. So the other point that I want to make is that it's the relationships between those archetypes, which I've already kind of alluded to, but the relationships between one archetype or the other is also reflected in the sky. When as we're going to talk about here in a minute, when the moon becomes opposite the sun, that's a relationship, and that is a moment of the full moon, and that tells us about the dynamic or interaction of the two archetypes that are represented. So then the other thing that I want to explore or explain is that typically in astrology, and especially you see it on social media and so on, is that we're looking at a snapshot. People are looking at the full moon, or they're looking at the new moon when we set intentions, the full moon when we realize the fulfillment of those intentions, or when it has come to full flower. Those are snapshots and moments. And while those are important, what is equally, if not more important, is really the cycle and the movement, because it's going on all the time. So snapshot and a moment, a cycle and a movement, and all of those are really important. Having said that, when we look at one of those moments, we can derive a great deal of information about these big picture, about these broader cycles. And so in that way, it's kind of analogous to those who may know this, but there's a branch of calculus which examines a moment or a point, analyzes that, and knows something about the big picture. And sometimes knowing the inner dynamics of a moment allows us to interface with it in a powerful way that can influence the big picture. And it's those special moments, like a new moon, when the energy of the sun and the moon are together, when we can bring our consciousness and our intentions to bear, that influences the overall unfoldment. So those are a few of the points that I wanted to make about the astrology itself and how I'm going to use this circle as I build it out and I will explain it and show that to you, how it's unfolding. And it brings us to the point that the thing I just mentioned, we might call them inflection points, is that there are specific points where things come together, where there's a nexus, where the energies are coming together. And when we engage with them is when we have the most agency. So let's think about that for a minute based on what we have. Now, I have the symbol for the sun here. The actual sun has moved away a little bit, so it's not in that same alignment. But when I do set this up for ceremonial purposes, I set it up for a specific moment, and then the sun will align. The sun in the sky will align, the moon will align with where it is out in the cosmos. Well, what does that do? That links our ceremonial space here on Earth with the cosmos. So the Earth is receiving communication with the cosmos all the time. If you look at the solar system as the family of the Earth is receiving that information all the time as things are moving. So it's a connection from the cosmos to the Earth. Our bodies are of the Earth. And so that communication comes into our bodies, and the bodies are the container of the soul. And when we make that linkage from the cosmos to the Earth, to the body, to the soul, now you have a ceremony where communication can occur. We can be both a receiver of that larger information and a transmitter. And it is in that connection, cosmos, earth, body, soul, and ultimately that is where consciousness exists. And one of the key things that links across all of these things, and we know this from so many other ways of understanding, but even a more rigorous understanding, is that it is what we as humans experience as love, and the love vibration that allows things to be transmitted across dimensions. So that's what can make doing ceremony at a point. We find alignment. When we create that alignment, we can receive clarity. And even if we don't know clearly, all we have to do is go into that vibration or frequency of love for our core essence to be in sync with, be receiving and sending. So to recap here, there's going to be some specific points that I want to enter into ceremony, especially in the next week. And all of these videos are going to be help us to understand what we're doing, so when we get to that point, we can come into that alignment and that integration and do the process. So the first thing I want to do, that's the intro. Those are the 4 videos. And I'm standing here next to the sun, and I'm going to explain a little bit just about some fundamental things about full moon. Not a specific full moon, but some fundamental things, because it turns out that what we call in astrology the opposition, which is what a full moon is going to be key to understanding how to integrate this very complex and complicated movement of energy that we're experiencing right now. So here's the energy of the sun, and I'm going to walk towards the center, which is going to be this, where essentially represents, here we are on Earth, and on one side is the sun shining towards the moon over here. And so the sun is our central energy and organizing principle around which the whole solar system functions. And one of the way, and it becomes kind of the driving light energy of our life. On the simplest and easiest to understand way, it is the movements that I'm making right now, and the thing and the energy that is making my heart beat started in the sun. It was captured by plants. I took it in as food, and now my body is using that. So that is the central energy of life, and it is akin to that spirit, the central light within. And what we have over here is the moon, the body closest to the earth, and was once part of the earth. And what it is doing is reflecting that light. And so we see that as very much linked to our bodies. And what the moon is doing is reflecting how that light of the life and the spirit is being received. And emotions are the language of the body. And so the moon is associated with our emotions. And it also is a regulator of rhythms, the rhythms of the body. So it is associated with that, with these movement from one cycle to another. And it is the repository of all of our experience. So it is connected to the subconscious mind. And it is from the subconscious mind that so much of our behaviors arise. So we have the light of spirit, the central energy of our life, and how it is being reflected and received in this vehicle of the soul, the body. So one of the things that can happen is that it's in opposition to each other. Normally, when we see the full moon rise, we're looking at the full moon. You can't not look at it. So one of the central principles of when in a full moon and other oppositions is awareness. We are aware, like especially this last full moon, because it was so much bigger and brighter than a normal one. And if you're looking at one thing, then you might be ignoring the fact that the light is actually coming from back here. And if you're on one side or the other, then those energies could be pushing against each other or pulling with each other. And that's a tension. That is a kind of conflict. But if we turn that around and we're actually creating more of a lemniscate, and we see the relationship between them as one reflecting to the other, feeding back to the other, and then there is this continuous movement and informing another thing can happen, and creativity can happen out of this instead of tension and pushing, but this evolution, this creativity that can arise from it. So that's an important thing to remember as we move along in my discussions, is that oppositions can be opposing and difficult, or they can be flowing and supportive and create another thing. But they also are about awareness. So with that, I'll just repeat once again that we're going to move now to the next video, but I'm going to remind you that we're going to examine several points from behind, and that the snapshots help support what we understand from the big picture, and that when we get that understanding of how we can interface with a snapshot, then we can kind of influence the outcome. I also want to emphasize, even though I'm emphasizing a single point, that it is always a flow. And so that there's periods of time that pass. So even if we can't be precise right on the point that something happens, like there's one moment when there's a full moon, but maybe we have to do the ceremony a little before or after, but we're focusing our awareness that this is the critical point. And later I'm going to show you how a physical way that helps us understand that relationship. So that's the beginning. This is where we'll bring this video to close, and hope that you watch the rest. Talk to us.